The United States has once again blacklisted Huawei's technology.
U.S. Federal Communications Commission has imposed a ban on import and sale of communication equipment from Chinese firms Huawei Technologies and ZTE.
News. President Trump has issued an executive order banning American companies from using foreign-made technology deemed to be a national security threat.
This sounds like deja vu, but it's currently happening. The only difference is that this is taking place with a new leadership. As you can see, the Biden administration has prohibited new telecommunications equipment from China's Huawei Technologies and ZTE from being approved because they represent an unforgivable danger to U.S. homeland safety. This is the second time this has occurred under two separate U.S. presidents. Is Huawei genuinely assisting the Chinese Communist Party, or is this all a massive misunderstanding? We must delve deeply to learn more. Hello and welcome to Economic News. Please like the video and subscribe with all notifications turned on since that helps a lot with promoting the video around the YouTube algorithm. Essentially, as of the fourth quarter of this year, the United States has prohibited the sale and import of all new Huawei communications equipment. This follows a rise of security worries accusing Huawei of being a CCP puppet. Huawei, on the other hand, has categorically disputed these allegations, characterizing them as misinformation intended to harm their reputation. They have even sued US boards in the search of clarity, but to no success thus far. Despite this appeal for innocence, all members of the United States Federal Communications Commission voted unanimously to implement the new regulations that punished Huawei. The FCC is committed to protecting our national security by ensuring that untrustworthy communications equipment is not authorized for use within our borders, said Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel in a statement. These new rules are an important part of our ongoing actions to protect the American people from national security threats involving telecommunications. The point is that the US is refusing to budge, and Huawei is refusing to accept responsibility, assuming there is any fault to admit. It's the age-old conflict between an impenetrable wall and an unstoppable force. Huawei is suffering from it, but it sounds better with the impenetrable unstoppable force thing, right? So penalizing Huawei is yet another move by the US in a protracted game of chess between the US and China, including cyber warfare and military concerns. It's similar to a drama series, only it's taking place on a worldwide scale with everything to lose and everything to gain. So where did it all begin, and what sparked it? Biden may be enforcing it, but Trump undoubtedly initiated it. Why have two US presidents' administrations with little to nothing in common when saying this one thing is the question? Huawei was blacklisted from the beginning, long before Trump entered the scene. How, you ask? Allow me to explain. Ren Zhengfei, a Chinese businessman, created Huawei in 1987. This individual is the reason Huawei may be considered to have gotten off to a good or terrible start. If I'm being objective, it really all depends on the perspective you're looking through. Ren Zhengfei used to be a member of China's People's Liberation Army. After being dismissed from the army, he started Huawei. As a matter of fact, Ren Zhengfei's military background may be fairly considered to have created an excellent foundation for Huawei, since it helped them to win some of their first major contracts. However, it was their significant military links that first drew them into the speculative group. The CCP links were too strong to ignore, and everyone wondered if the corporation truly worked autonomously, or if they were simply CCP cronies. It definitely didn't help Huawei when they were sued early on for stealing technology from other firms, and these were not unsubstantiated allegations. The 2003 Cisco versus Huawei dispute comes to mind as one of the more aggressive lawsuits that sparked headlines like this. As Huawei developed, the rest of the world began to doubt them, which culminated in US regulatory agencies denying Huawei the opportunity to purchase non-Chinese firms in the US on the grounds that Huawei had dubious links to the CCP and so posed a serious security risk. Even the United Kingdom was unfriendly to them. All of this is to emphasize that these security risks have existed for decades, but they have generally remained in the shadows. with little impact on average users. However, that stability was shattered as Huawei's success in the smartphone market became more apparent. As Huawei began to attract more and more consumers, putting its devices in the hands of an increasing number of civilians, the dynamic shifted. Huawei's success was so pronounced that by 2018, it was the second largest smartphone manufacturer, trailing only Samsung. Yes, Huawei was larger than Apple. It's one thing when Huawei has no foothold at all, and quite another when they have devices wherever you look. In such a circumstance, all the spy whispers turn into screaming. One might argue that Huawei's rise to prominence was what prompted the US to act in 2018. And I don't know about you, but if 2018 reminds me of anything, it's Donald J. Trump's administration. When Donald Trump became president, he was adamant that justice prevail in America's international affairs, among other things. He thought that America had been getting the short end of the stick for far too long, so he began going after all unfair trade practices, which sparked the US-China trade war. As part of this battle, Trump went after foreign firms that had committed violations or had shady transactions in the United States. And, surprise, surprise, Huawei was on that list. Its notoriety for theft of intellectual property, among many other things, has now caught up with them. In what was an unusual and unexpected gesture, but very much on Donald Trump's wish list, he did this.
Huawei is very dangerous.
Huawei is now banned in the US.
Let me be clear. There is no Huawei or ZTE equipment in our network today.
Not going to do business with Huawei.
Huawei represents a national security risk.
On May 15, 2019, President Trump signed an executive order prohibiting the use of telecommunications equipment from foreign corporations deemed a national security threat. The U.S. Department of Commerce maintained a registry of firms known as an entity list. Of course, Huawei was on that list. When the order was issued, there was a lot of misunderstanding about what Huawei was limited to and what was acceptable because it was an amalgamation of several enterprises. There was a lot of ambiguity about the situation. On the same day, Huawei stated restricting Huawei from doing business in the United States will not make the US more secure or stronger. Instead, this will only serve to limit the US to inferior yet more expensive alternatives, leaving the US lagging behind in 5G deployment. Based on their own statement, they, like everyone else, assumed that President Trump's order would only apply to Huawei's networking gear and not their smartphones or other devices. All they had to do was wait a few days to discover how completely incorrect they were. Just 4 days later, on May 19, Google said publicly that it will comply with Trump's Huawei ban. After understanding the order's phrasing, Google concluded that the right line of action would be to remove Huawei from the Google suite of digital goods. They made it crystal clear that they did not want to do this because it was obviously terrible for business, but an executive order carries a great deal of weight. With Google withdrawing services to Huawei, the essential services provided by Huawei devices via Android were all discontinued. Because the Android operating system is already open source, anybody may use it, but Gmail, YouTube, Google Drive, and even the Google Play Store are no longer accessible for Huawei to utilize on new devices. Given that these were the key functions of a smartphone, Google's removal was a deadly blow to Huawei's smartphone sector. Without access to Google Apps, millions of Huawei smartphone customers were naturally anxious that their phones might suddenly cease operating properly, causing chaos and obviously a decline in sales. Consider this: the world's second largest smartphone maker has had crucial services on all of its cell phones terminated. That is the perfect recipe of sheer mayhem. Following Google's announcement, a slew of other corporations issued comments severing connections with Huawei. Qualcomm, Intel, ARM, Microsoft, and others were among them. Huawei was virtually isolated and alone. They had been set aside to perish with no services, software, or chips. After the ban was implemented, a few things happened. Well, more like a lot of things happened, but I'll just highlight the important ones. First and foremost, Huawei made a bit of a fuss. Alright, a huge fuss, and appropriately so. they quickly filed a slew of lawsuits against the US Department of Commerce in response to this entity list. From May 2019 till roughly mid-2020, Huawei filed lawsuit after lawsuit in the hopes of getting a reprieve, but nothing worked. Again, fighting an executive order is difficult as they discovered the hard way. Despite the fact that some US-based corporations were in support of Huawei and strongly opposed the ban, I'm confident their support eventually amounted to very little. Even China's threats of punishment were ineffective, and Huawei ultimately lost. However, to their benefit, the US extended repeated amnesty periods to allow Huawei to adapt. Huawei received around a year in total through prolonged amnesty periods. This provided them some breathing room to devise a strategy, which we'll discuss in a moment. The ultimate embargo occurred on April 1, 2020, and that was when everything came tumbling down. Since then, the US has refused multiple corporations permission to deal with Huawei and has maintained that Huawei is a security risk. All of this has occurred between 2018 and 2022. And as I stated at the start, the Biden administration has added to the prohibition by not relenting and not easing any of these limitations. It's harsh, but if Huawei is a CCP lackey, the consequences for the US might be severe. So, where does this leave Huawei? To be honest, Huawei was too large to fail, and if the suspicions about its CCP links are true, it will never fall under CCP's control. Despite the support system, some quick thinking and planning on their part did help to make the changeover reasonably seamless. To retaliate against the ban and stay viable, Huawei built its own operating system, which is named Harmony OS. The operating system was created to mitigate the impact of US chip and software prohibitions, and it has already had some success. Since its inception in 2019, it has witnessed significant growth, and given that Huawei was already well positioned in the market, it had a sizable user base to begin with on the Huawei line of smartphones. Over the past 3 years, millions of system developers and ecology partners have worked together with us, riding the wind and waves, and now we've not only garnered 150 million devices using the OS, but also built a dynamic, fast-growing Harmony ecosystem, said Huawei Executive Board member Richard Yu Changdong in a recent social media post. Along with Harmony OS was Huawei's own app gallery, which is functionally identical to Google's Play Store. However, when it comes to usability, the app gallery lags far behind. Despite making great strides, Harmony OS remains far behind both Android and iOS in terms of market dominance. These stat counter figures offer a pretty clear picture, but the important thing to note is that Huawei is establishing their foothold. So, where do we go from here? We now have a top global firm barred from selling or using services in the United States, a vindictive China, and other unhappy companies that believe the lack of Huawei in the US is robbing them of financial prospects. However, the US administration is determined that there can be no middle ground when it comes to national security. The claims against Huawei are difficult to deny, and the US administration believes Huawei is a pawn of the CCP and cannot be trusted. There is indeed a lot more to this corporate tale, and only time will tell how it all plays out. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please do leave a comment down below if you will ever consider purchasing a Huawei device, and if not, tell us why you wouldn't buy one. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please do check our other videos in our channel.